Hello, this is Jewel Padrell. This is my assignment number 2 for Organizational Leadership, Management 453, Dr. Luis Ortiz, Professor. What's unique about Jewel Padrell? The most unique thing about me is that I discovered that there are roughly 30,000 students currently enrolled at CNM. Of these, there's only 3 Vietnam veterans. I am one of the 3 and the oldest. My leadership presentation is on Nelson Mandela, a human rights leader and president of South Africa. First, let me introduce you to a couple of the characteristics of a great leader. This quote is one that he not only espoused, he actually lived and practiced it daily. Nelson Mandela, as a leader, diligently employed the practice of empowering his followers. He was fully aware that empowering his followers would be a major key in the achievement of the elimination of apartheid. I want to give you a little bio background of Nelson Mandela.
Against overwhelming odds, he achieved his dream of equality for all South Africans. Nelson Mandela was born on July 18, 1918, in a small South African village. His father, a tribal chief, gave his son the name Rolihlahla. At the age of 7, he began his British education, and his teacher gave him the name Nelson. When his father died, Nelson was sent to live with the leader of the Thembu people. He groomed Nelson for leadership, letting him sit in on council meetings, sending him to the finest schools. During a break from college, Nelson ran away to Johannesburg in order to avoid a prearranged marriage. It was 1941, and for the first time, Nelson came face to face with the brutal reality of a racially divided South Africa.
By entering the city as a kind of anonymous black person, he gets a first-hand experience of what black life is like for urban black South Africans at that time, and he gets a kind of immediate confrontation with the white apartheid racist state.
I think that he had two languages. He had a deep historical language from his own learning, his own training within his tribal background. But I also think that he had a language of the law. He had a completely contemporary language, and he brought those two together in the language of human rights.
He began attending meetings of the African National Congress, an organization that aimed to establish a democratic government. During this time, he married his first wife, Evelyn.
The apartheid regime really begins to be kind of built up after 1948, when the National Party comes into power, and they were the party of apartheid.
A year later, the ANC adopted nonviolent civil disobedience as official policy. In 1952, they launched the campaign for the defiance of unjust laws, and Nelson traveled to South Africa in support of that effort. The National Party government took steps to restrict Nelson's movements, banning him from attending any gatherings and confined him to Johannesburg.
He was made the chief volunteer of the Youth League's National Defiance campaign, and that's when the authorities began to notice him. The government knew that they had someone that they could not look away from.
He and Oliver Tambo decide to set up a law firm that will specialize in serving the black population. That will be a kind of a low-priced law firm, an accessible law firm, and that will specialize in defending black clients against the apartheid laws.
In 1956, the government arrested Nelson and 150 other activists, charging them with treason. Nelson's relentless dedication to activism took a toll on his personal life, and his wife Evelyn left him. As he waited 4 years for his trial, he met a beautiful, young, independent-minded Winnie Madikizela, who would become his second wife in 1958. In 1960, the South African government outlawed the African National Congress. Mandela went underground and formed the Mkhonto weSizwe, the Spear of the Nation.
Mkhonto weSizwe was formed after Sharpeville, when 67 people were killed, men, women, and children, and over 180 were wounded during a peaceful demonstration. It was at that time that Mandela realized, I think it was a very difficult decision for him, that non-violent resistance was not enough.
Since he was wanted by the government, he traveled abroad, secretly gaining support for the cause. When he returned to South Africa, he was arrested and sentenced to 5 years in prison. While in prison, he was also charged with sabotage and conspiracy to overthrow the government. Mandela stood trial but refused to defend himself because this would legitimize the state's case. Mandela received a life sentence to be served in the prison on Robben Island, a desolate rock island 7 miles off the coast of Cape Town. Instead of being forgotten in jail, Mandela became a symbol for the movement to end apartheid. During the 1980s, several offers of release were made to Mandela on the condition that he renounce violence. He refused. In February of 1990, the government declared the ANC legal and announced Mandela was to be released.
Here's this man who hasn't been seen for over a quarter century, walking out into the world.
Now free at the age of 71, Mandela was named the head of the ANC. His work to help bring an end to apartheid earned him the Nobel Peace Prize in 1993. In 1994, for the first time in more than 300 years, blacks in South Africa would have the opportunity.
Nelson Mandela was an individual that felt that there were more than one way to achieve his goal. However, in the process, he did not allow circumstances to deter his passion in the achievement of the goal, but he surmised that it was not yielding the results required. He directed the ANC to resort to the destruction and the disruption of the South African infrastructure. What made Nelson Mandela an effective leader? Nelson Mandela understood the major leadership skills. One of them are goal settings. The 27 years he had been in prison gave him an opportunity to understand and to analyze what his strengths and weaknesses were, and how they would be effective in directing him to achieve the one goal he had in mind, and that was the elimination of apartheid. Inspiring and persuading others. In addition to the violence that was dealt on the black South Africans by the all-white government, Nelson Mandela also had to contend with the black-on-black violence which plagued South Africa. It was in his ability to inspire the majority of the white South Africans and persuade the black South Africans that it was in everyone's best interest that apartheid should be abolished. Empathy is defined as the ability to understand and share the feelings of another person. As a leader, Nelson Mandela had a clear understanding that the only way to eradicate apartheid was to unite the country. In spite of his internal anger and the treatment he and other black South Africans had endured from the all-white government, he demonstrated a great deal of empathy and restraint in his efforts. Active listening. Mandela, as a leader, had the ability to make decisions based on the information that he had garnered from being an active listener. His use of eye contact, a warm smile, in addition to his negotiating skills, aided him in his effectiveness. Learning from experience. He was often quoted as saying that the 27 years he spent in prison afforded him the ability to learn what people were really like, and more importantly, that no matter the color of an individual's skin or background, there was always something to be learned from that individual. Rewarding others. As a leader, Mandela often planted himself in the background, allowing others to receive the accolades for success of the various efforts that were undertaken. Mandela was a people person. As a people person, has been understated not only by individuals of the white government, they often commented on his friendliness. Individuals that were members of his staff when he became president stated that he made them feel as though they were members of his immediate family. As a risk taker, no one can, and maybe no one ever will, understand the tremendous risk that Nelson Mandela took upon himself in his efforts to end apartheid. He took on the task of being in front of the ANC with the full knowledge of the possible risks. If you make peace with your enemy, you have to work with your enemy. Then he becomes your partner. Nelson Mandela exhibited an extraordinary high level of honesty and integrity. His contemporaries knew they could depend on him. His ability to do the right thing was never a question. The then current president of South Africa, F.W. de Klerk, would often comment on how passionate Nelson Mandela was regarding the elimination of apartheid. Not only did white South Africans find Mandela a very approachable individual, leaders and dignitaries from around the world also discovered his humility, his pride, and his true sense of purpose. I got as a takeaway from the presentation, Mandela says, "It always seems impossible until it's done." And I got from the Bible, "As a man thinketh, so is he," Proverbs 23:7. And from Henry Ford, "If you think you can, you will. If you think you can't, you won't." And then my references.